All right, let's dive into one of the most famous and, frankly, one of the weirdest cases in the entire history of neuroscience. This is the incredible story of Phineas Gage, a man who survived something that should have killed him instantly, but in the process, he kind of lost himself.
And this quote really gets right to the heart of the mystery. It's from the people who knew him best, his friends. After his accident, they looked at him and said, in so many words, the man we knew is gone. He was, as they put it, no longer Gage. So that's the central question we're going to tackle. How is it possible for a physical injury to completely change who you are as a person? It's a scientific detective story that's been unfolding for over 170 years. And tonight, we're going to follow the clues. Okay, so first up, the accident. We have to start here because what happened to Phineas Gage in 1848, by all laws of medicine and biology, just shouldn't have been survivable. So picture this. It's 1848 in Vermont. Phineas Gage is 25 years old. He's not just some guy. He's a railroad foreman, respected, good at his job, leading a crew that's blasting through rock to lay down new track. It was just another day at work. Until, it wasn't. The way the accident happened is just horrifying. Gage is using a long metal rod, called a tamping-iron, to pack blasting powder into a hole in the rock. Somehow, a spark hits the powder, and the whole thing explodes. That tamping iron, we're talking a solid metal bar, over 3 feet long, shoots out of the hole like a missile. It goes in right under his left cheek, tears through his brain, and flies out the very top of his skull, landing about 80 feet away. And this is where the story goes from a terrible tragedy to a scientific marvel. He should have been dead on the spot, but he wasn't. Gage was thrown back, but within minutes, he was conscious. He was talking. He even walked with a little help. The doctor who showed up, a guy named John Harlow, was completely stunned. Phineas Gage had survived the unsurvivable. But his physical survival was just the beginning of a much deeper, much stranger puzzle. Because the body of Phineas Gage healed, yeah, but the man who came back was someone else entirely. I mean, just look at this contrast. Before the accident, Gage was known for being a responsible, a capable leader, well-liked by his crew. Afterwards, he was impulsive, used tons of profanity, and was completely unreliable. His judgment in social situations was just gone. He couldn't keep a job. He looked like Phineas Gage, but he sure didn't act like him. And here's the really crucial part that baffled scientists for years. This wasn't a case of just general brain damage. His basic intelligence seemed fine. His memory was there, he could speak perfectly well, what scientists call his cold cognition, his ability to think rationally, solve a puzzle, that kind of thing. It was all still there. So how could his personality just completely fall apart while his intellect was fine? That was the paradox. For more than a century, that question just hung in the air. But then, modern science came along. And using brand new technology, scientists were able to go back to the original evidence, Gage's actual skull, and essentially revisit the scene of the crime to finally figure it out. You can actually watch the investigation evolve over time. It started way back in 1868 with Dr. Harlow's original report. Then, big jump to 1994, when Dr. Antonio Damasio and his team built the first 3D computer model of Gage's skull to trace the path of the iron. And then, in 2012, researchers took it a step further, using something called connectomics to map not just the areas that were damaged, but the connections, the wiring between them. So what did they find? Well, the first big number was this: 4%. The rod destroyed about 4% of his cerebral cortex, the brain's gray matter. That's a lot, for sure. But was it enough to explain a total personality transplant? Probably not. But here's the real clincher. The damage to the gray matter was only part of the story. The real devastation was to the white matter, the brain's internal wiring, all the cables that connect everything. The model showed that the iron tore through and destroyed about 11% of the white matter in his left hemisphere. This wasn't just like damaging a few computers. It was like cutting the entire network's internet cables. And that discovery, that the connections were severed, that was the big aha moment. For the first time, scientists could draw a straight line from the specific physical damage inside his skull to the very specific changes in his behavior. It turns out that tamping iron passed directly through a part of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC for short. The easiest way to think about this area? It's like the brain's CEO of social skills. It's the part that links our raw, gut-feeling emotions with our logical planning-ahead brain.
So what the iron did was create something called a disconnection syndrome. It's not just that the CEO's office was damaged. The phone lines connecting the CEO to the rest of the company, especially the emotions department, were completely cut. So Gage could still think logically, but his thoughts were totally disconnected from any of the social or emotional information that tells us how to behave around other people.
So, with all that in mind, let's talk about why this one guy's terrible accident over 170 years ago became one of the most important case studies ever, literally changing how we think about the human brain.
Well, for starters, his case was one of the first real pieces of proof that specific parts of the brain do specific things. Before Gage, that was a pretty controversial idea. Second, the modern analysis of his skull really shifted the focus in neuroscience. It proved that the connections between brain regions are just as important, maybe even more important than the regions themselves. And finally, his story kicked off whole new fields of research into how our emotions guide our decisions and what happens when that link is broken.
If you walk away from this with just one idea, let it be this one. The story of Phineas Gage proved for the first time that our social self, our personality, our ability to get along with others can be physically separated from our book smarts. Our social intelligence literally lives in a specific and very vulnerable piece of our neural hardware.
And that leaves us with one last really big and kind of unsettling question, doesn't it? If the very core of who we are, our personality, our character, is so dependent on the physical wiring in our heads, wiring that can be scrambled by a freak accident with a metal rod, then what does that say about who or what we really are?